So what we have before us today is the continuation of our goals and objectives template. And the goals and objectives, we got through a significant portion of them last time. There seemed to be really general consensus on what we're looking at. There were some good additions, and again, the emphasis right now is get the goals and objectives out there. So we will, excuse me, going up the stairs is like exhausting. Oh my gosh. We will go ahead and focus on paring them down with the steering committee or at our next meeting. So when we plan out our next meeting, hey, Ryan, we'll go ahead and start talking about the actual strategies for these elements and how we can go ahead and pare them down a little bit. So what you have in front of you today, and I'm just adding a further, more robust section there, Ryan, is lots of paper. Sorry. Is this overall section here, and the highlighted portion is where we left off last time, talking about the prioritizing ADA compliance, prioritizing dimension-friendly standards, and implementation of signage. So some of that can definitely be combined to one in the future. That is where we left off talking last time. Between then and now, I added a number of different elements to this document. These are largely in line with the 2007 comprehensive plans layout. So we were using that as our kind of guiding document before. We reviewed the ADA transition plan, we reviewed the street policy. We took a look at the sidewalk replacement protocol. So all of those elements are called out in these subsequent sections. But I want to kind of take them one element at a time and talk through them with you so that we're all feeling good about them. So when we come into our final meeting next time, we all feel great about the document that's actually going to go to the steering committee for review. Okay, perfect. And because I'm already scrolled somewhat down, oh, Ryan, perfect. We'll wait and see if he's actually on his audio. Brian, can you hear us? Perfect. So we were just talking about how we were going to go through the document, just like we did last time. Let's start at the bottom and go backwards, because why not, right? Okay. And actually, Terry, let me pass this all the way out to you as well.
Can you hit +1 font size?
Oh, we can go much larger, I promise.
Thanks.
All right. So one of the elements here that we wanted to make sure we included is promoting traffic calming throughout the community. And so here we have 4 objectives, excuse me, promoting traffic calming strategies for every street project where appropriate. So that means, are we constructing new streets? Are we reconstructing streets? Are we resurfacing them? Sometimes if you're only resurfacing, for example, you're not going to be narrowing the street width. You know, you're going to keep all of your curb infrastructure in the same spot. So where appropriate is what that's getting at in this case. Secondly, consider road diets for multi-lane roads where appropriate, as some corridors in Winona remain identified barriers and safety concerns. And apologize for the apostrophe there. So this is alluding directly to Broadway, frankly. We already have a corridor study that says that Broadway is dangerous. It was explicitly called out in the 2007 plan. This is continuing to advocate for road diets where appropriate. Other multi-lane roads, like Mankato Avenue, haven't been identified as safety concerns necessarily, but here we're also calling out them as barriers. So we already know that they were considered barriers in their past studies in the complete streets policy, for example.
Barrier in what way?
Hard to cross, unsafe, bad sight lines, feelings of isolation as you're going through them, unable to get across them in a timely manner. So following standards set forth to do so. And that goes back to, the dimension friendly conversation that we had before about how we want to make sure that we're a community that's considering our least able users as priorities when we talk about planning for the future. Here we have one that's focused on slowing streets design speeds to miles per hour. So the element here is that a street has a design speed, and typically a signed speed is going to be somewhat reliant on fluctuations of about the 85th percentile of expected traffic users in that area. Why we have this specifically called out is I'm going to share my screen to a different document real fast. When you look at traffic incidents and collisions at different speeds between pedestrians and automobiles, you see that below 30 miles per hour, you have a considerably higher chance of surviving those types of accidents. As soon as you go above 30 miles an hour, you start getting to 50%, 75%, and 90% risk of death. So if our emphasis is actually on redesigning our streets to be at 30 miles an hour and not at 30 miles per hour plus 5, for example, our goal is to have those slower speed streets. Yep,
But everything is 30 now, pretty much.
basically everything is signed 30, and Ryan, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that in the state of Minnesota, without explicit exemption, 30 miles per hour is the lowest speed limit that we can mark.
We can go down to 20.
Oh, we can go down to 20,
Mhm.
okay. We were just talking about design speed and aiming for that 30 mile per hour mark to
Okay.
avoid dangerous streets.
Yep.
Yeah.
We can go to 20, but I don't see any need to go to 20, but I think 30 is kind of your best one to shoot for.
Perfect. Cool. I'll go back to our document here. Hold on one second. And lastly, traffic calming measures should be integrated into new streets and roads and should be considered for all road reconstruction and resurfacing projects. That's basically already what's spelled out in the 2007 plan as well. So talking about how we can make sure that we have good physical improvements that actually do calm traffic as we go through locations. Any issues with this overall goal here at the end? I'm seeing a lot of head nods. Good. Feeling good about it? All right, so the next goal that we have is local street improvements should incorporate narrow street design based on urban street design guidance. So I'm using urban street design guidance as a stand-in for the guidance issued by organizations like the Federal Housing Highway Administration, issued by Minnesota DOT. And then also because there are differentiations between rural communities, which Winona is often lumped into as a rural community, but we really have an urban design fabric. And so utilizing those urban design standards when we do have the opportunity to differentiate is really helpful. So, for example, the county has rural pedestrian guidance, and it's things like just paint a line on the side of the street. Well, no, we're an urban area. So we want to focus on sidewalk infrastructure where we possibly can, for example. So in this case, we have advocate for changes and apply for variances to the municipal state aid roads program when funding street improvements with state monies. So we know this because Brian and Brian were pretty clear that we don't get a lot of local money for our street improvements. So how can we work within the confines of the Minnesota state aid roads program? And in this case, what they use in order to look at some of those programs, some of those elements are looking at things like a policy on geometric design of highway streets, context sensitive solutions for designing for major urban thoroughfares for walkable communities. And we're trying to work within the confines of those programs to get the best outcomes to advocate for those narrower streets. Feeling good? Everybody's following, we're all tracking. Beautiful. Gonna go back. Sorry, Brian, we're jerking you around a whole bunch
That's
here.
fine.
All right, 2, promoting narrower street widths, travel lane widths, parking widths, and intersection crossing distances, following again those urban street design guidance from appropriate transportation organizations. Emphasizing connectivity and new subdivision design and ensuring connections to other subdivisions and the existing street network. That's also an emphasis from our land use planning subcommittee and from our housing subcommittee. And also our park and rec subcommittee, which meets for the first time tomorrow. Emphasizing traffic calming and considering street construction projects and prioritizing a pedestrian friendly human scale street design for streets. So all of these elements are almost all reiterated from the 2007 plan. One of the things that Mitch was mentioning at the start of the meeting before we officially began the meeting was things like, how can we make sure that like our parking spaces aren't 9 feet wide for 6.5 feet wide cars, for example. And so things like that where we can reconsider necessarily how much pavement do we actually need when we have road reconstructions or when we have new streets going into it. The 2007 plan explicitly calls out 40-foot wide widths, 36-foot wide widths, et cetera. And so that's where that new street design comes into play, because in our current zoning code, we say we need 36 feet, for example. Is that necessarily the actual amount that we need? Let's reassess and take a look. Yep. Any issues with that goal? Mitch? You just made it.
No, not really. I'm like, it sounds, yeah, not in my head the whole time.
Okay.
Well, and I just think that this one is especially important, especially related to new subdivision. A big reason why people are saying we don't have more housing in the city and we haven't had subdivisions, just costs involved. And a significant portion of costs when you're putting a new subdivision in addition to infrastructure is streets, so you can have really wide streets, you can pay more on pavement, more on curbing, more maybe not more on curbing, more on pavement. The costs add up. Quickly, so if we can have a policy or at least have a direction and if developers, when they're coming into the city, can state that, we support narrower streets where appropriate. Hopefully that helps them to get that approved, when it goes through the approval process.
Yeah, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like 1.7 million for our last municipal aid. It was for like less than a half mile.
Probably,
Yeah,
probably.
so to give you an idea of the cost, I mean, it's, say we almost $2 million up for a half mile of street, and that's curb gutter, other infrastructure as well.
So subdivisions seem to be pretty expensive. That's what you're saying.
That's the takeaway.
I guess I would be, the variances for the state aid program, I would be a little hesitant on that. Just because, I mean, we're getting the money from them. We don't want to start ruffling feathers too much, and
Okay.
our state aid streets are the ones carrying, I mean, by far our biggest amounts of traffic. I mean, the smaller streets, no problem with narrowing those up. The state aid ones, I wouldn't have a problem narrowing them, I guess, to our standards that we have to follow, but the variances, I'd be a little hesitant on.
Have we ever gone through a variance process for those? Do you know?
Not since I've been here, and possibly before that, but not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Maybe we'll take a look at that. In terms of,
That's like a state highway, like 43 or something going through, you have particular, requirements.
Yep, so like, we were gonna do South Baker this year as our state aid project, and we have certain requirements for, parking lane widths, driving lane widths. All of that is spelled out for what we have to do to get our funding. Okay. So.
and so I'm not familiar enough with the variance process either. So like our overall consultants who are drafting things to support the baseline reports, for example, and I think we call it out in the complete streets policy too, is how does it work if we're not familiar with it? Is it possible to successfully navigate it, or is it just actually they say they have a process, but nobody gets approved, and then we don't get any more money in the future? Yes, completely get that.
But we do hear from other cities throughout Minnesota that have gone through the variance process.
Okay.
And been approved for it, so it's not like it's a nail in the coffin type of thing if you ask for a variance.
Sure. So we can learn from other communities then.
Exactly.
Good. All right, let's pop up to our next goal, implementing the complete streets policy and pedestrian and bicycle plan network and improvements, facilitating planning processes for streets program for multimodal improvements before bringing designs to the public for approval. In particular, the accessible government subcommittee really wanted to see that go forward. Seeking grant funding and private partnerships for bicycle and pedestrian improvements consistent with the goals of the complete streets policy and pedestrian and bicycle plan of the Park and Recreation Master Plan. So let's be proactive about getting those grant funds, and let's not just rely on our municipal state aid road monies, because we know the variances are going to be limited, or our own local funding. Incorporating bicycle parking in the community on public rights of way and off-street parking facilities. So that's something that we've done in a limited amount and not really consistently in our community. And then allowing for substitution of bicycles and other multimodal systems when considering new development circulation needs. So that gets at things like parking minimums, which we've had a push from our land use subcommittee, or downtown and riverfront subcommittee, or housing subcommittee to consider relaxing those even further. And then additionally, do you have to have a parked car for your parking minimum? Can it be a parked bicycle? Can it be parked scooters? Can it be parked flying cars in the future? Something like that. We'll find a way to make it work. Any concerns or issues regarding that section? Beautiful. Here we have a goal to prioritize sidewalks and multimodal access in neighborhoods. So the objectives for that would be implementing sidewalks on both sides of public rights of way in new subdivisions. That was the 2007 goal. We currently have only one side in our Unified Development Code. Incorporating shared use paths connecting new subdivisions to recreation trails networks. So let's make sure that our new subdivisions actually can get to those locations. Continue to reinvest in sidewalk maintenance in a section by section approach under the sidewalk improvement program. Our current sidewalk improvement program is really quite excellent. Most people who we work with are very impressed that we stick to it well. Obviously, I think Ryan would be happy with more money every year. Promoting shorter crossing distances at intersections and narrow streets in general. Again, this goes to cost savings for new developers. This goes to increased safety for people who don't have to spend a huge amount of time in intersections. We talked about dementia-friendly standards last time, making it as easy as possible to traverse. Any issues regarding prioritizing sidewalks and multimodal access in neighborhoods?
Is number 4 trying to say, let's get more bump outs, or is there some other meaning?
So curb extensions are one way to do it. You could just have narrow streets as well. There are probably other ways to do this. So you could have median islands in the middle as well. So you're only crossing one lane of
Okay.
traffic at a time.
Okay.
It's gonna be context sensitive, whatever we
Okay.
do. So these objectives are, of course, are meant to be guiding principles so that when we do come in and say we have a new subdivision that needs approval, we say, hey, listen, you have a 40-foot wide street here. You do need to put in a curb extension,
Okay.
or you have a two lanes in each direction, maybe a pedestrian median islands would be appropriate for this. Okay. Randy, you looked like you were gonna say
Yeah,
something.
just a kudos to, again, from the maintenance side, especially for where we've got upheaval, right, and they go in and grind. That has been a godsend. I mean, I can't tell you how many times on, other places where I've been, and I mean, you think you see stuff and all of a sudden it grabs your foot as you're walking over and you stumble, stuff on that, but the grinding has done a great job of helping to smooth that, off on where you typically have that unevenness and stuff. So,
That reminds me, I think it was you at the last meeting that was at, that said the train tracks over Sioux Street are terrible on when you're biking. And I live on Sioux Street right near those, and I thought, I just deal with them on my way. But I liked one last week with 2 dozen eggs in my basket.
Oh.
and I ate 2 of them, bro.
Oh my God. I believe it. They cannot survive that.
That's like real world proof right there.
We can put that in here. We'll talk about crossings in a second, but we'll add that. Money.
Eggs, bro.
Yeah, must pass egg test.
Yeah.
That'll be perfect.
That's hilarious. Well, I'm sorry about your egg.
The worst part was I was delivering them to some refugees.
Oh, that does make it worse.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump up to our next goal, which is implementing the citywide trail system outlined in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and the Complete Streets Policy and Pedestrian and Bicycle Plan. So some of the objectives supporting this are pursuing shared use paths on public rights of way as connections between recreation destinations and kind of orient them as linear parks that prioritize non-automobile traffic that is safe, convenient, and comfortable for all users. So this is getting at the Parks and Recreation Master Plan goal of connecting Lake Path, for example, to the river, or connecting some of the other neighborhood parks like along the 7th Street Bicycle Boulevard, for example. So it just feels like you're naturally extending as you go from park to park. This has been in particular a point for the downtown and riverfront subcommittee, who were like, once you get to the riverfront, you have nowhere else to really go conveniently, or it doesn't feel that way. Obviously we have sidewalks, but making sure that we actually have some of those.
So the idea of a linear park or that concept, is that like, so to make green pathways, is that what we're talking about, that connect? those
Yeah,
areas?
so like our current Huff Street programming for the Complete Streets policy has sidewalk level shared use paths on the sides. So you would feel like, you have the actual automobile traffic and 2 lanes of traffic.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the public right of way would be sidewalks that shared use paths. So it would feel like you're just going around Lake Path, walking along the university, walking up to the riverfront trail. Yep. Similarly, there are going to be some hurdles to some of these things. For example, Main Street is Minnesota State Highway 43. The odds of getting something like that passed without great cooperation and working on some of these projects is difficult. But not that we should strive for better, right? Perfect. Supporting the implementation of the off-roads trails detailed in the Park and Recreation Master Plan that will primarily be used as recreational, that should say, recreation, and secondarily provide access as general transportation of users from point A to point B. So this is, for example, the Bluffs Traverse Plan, going from Sugarloaf all the way west to those other subdivisions, the other recreation opportunities. Would you want to travel that for your commute? Maybe, maybe not. I wouldn't. Other people might want to. Invest.
Way.
There we go.
Investing in bicycle infrastructure as detailed in the Complete Streets Policy and Pedestrian Bicycle Plan, and prioritize investment in street resurfacing and reconstruction projects arise. So this is essentially saying, hey, let's make sure we're pairing our infrastructure projects with our multimodal outcomes and our parks and trail connection outcomes, not necessarily saying we're only going to dump money into a parks connector on a street that was just resurfaced, for example. Similarly, we have investing in bicycle infrastructure as detailed in those other plans, because those other plans are going to be updated a lot more easily than the individual comprehensive plan. So for example, the complete streets policy has some elements that we polled members of the public to see what are you most comfortable with. And so we'd like to lean toward what the public actually is comfortable with. Similarly, in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, what kind of trail instances are going to be the best uses of those locations. Investing in the existing sidewalk network and expand it to include sidewalks on both sides of rights of way and new subdivisions, and incorporate shared use paths for connecting new subdivisions to recreation trails networks. That's a reiteration of that previous point, the other goal. Supporting the implementation of the waterfront trail network. So that's again, riverfront connecting over to the water. And supporting and advocate for regional trail connections like the Flyway Trail, the Great River Trail, the Mississippi River Trail / US Bikeway 45, and others. So there's county trail systems, there are state trail systems, there's US trail systems, all of those things that we want to make sure that we're trying to connect to as much as possible. And importantly, advocating for that as well. Any issues or concerns with this goal? Mitch, you got
I
some eyebrow
know,
action
furrowed,
going on.
right? Yeah, no, I just am. I mean, it's a little more like detailed and wordy with the, sorry, I'm an English major,
Mhm.
so now I'm like editing it, but like, it's harder to understand the objectives in some spots. It feels a little bit more like, you know, just the lay person couldn't understand it. I don't know what like random person is reading the comprehensive plan for fun, you know, but like, yeah. So that's just like a little thing, but I was just thinking about it.
We will happily look at the wording,
For sure.
I promise.
Do you mind, can we go back to one that we said we were okay with?
Yeah, of course.
So it's not, so I think it was under the objective, with the goal of implement the complete streets policy.
Mhm.
So number 4, I think you said was part of what about parking. And I brought this up before, but it really is the thing that maybe I don't understand. But it seems to me that a lot of landlords, a lot of developers want to give people as little as they can get away with. And the fact is, most Winonians do have a car, you know, most of Belgium, most households, you know. And so if they're renting out places that don't have a place for a car, and they're likely to have tenants who have cars,
Mhm.
then those tenants have to put their cars, you know, if you're wealthy, you're gonna get a place that you can put your car right there.
Mhm.
And if you're not wealthy, you're more likely to get a place where maybe you have to put your car 2 blocks away and move it overnight because of in the winter time. Like, it just seems like it would be good if because it might be that people, I hope they do, that lots of people have bikes instead of cars. But in that case, maybe there's something that can be worked out with the city, that we have these extra slots because we have 16 tenants who are all biking everywhere they go. And those 16 slots could maybe be rented to the city or owned by the city or something to that effect. But just telling them, like, don't worry, you can make half of it parking for cars and half of it parking for bikes, and good luck to everybody who has a car and doesn't have a slot, you know?
Yeah, so the approach that we've been hearing from the public over the last few years and also through the comp plan process it's multidimensional, of course, but there are a few things. So for example, on the housing side, it's about $8,000 per parking space to put in a new parking space. And where does that go when you're renting out a place? It goes to the rent that you're charging to that individual, and then you have new maintenance and reinvestment. So part of it's flexibility there, so that they're supplying, rather than 2 units per space, maybe their market is 1 unit per space. So it's about providing that actual market demand flexibility. And we know, because we removed parking minimums in downtown, in the mixed use downtown core and downtown fringe in 2017, that the actual number of publicly available parking spaces has gone up since we removed those parking minimums. And so the parking minimums, people are supplying parking regardless of how much parking we require of them. And so we're letting the market kind of sort itself out in that regard. The other element, though, is parking management and circulation management. So when we talk about things like you were just bringing up, you know, if I have excess parking, can I rent it out to the city or can I rent it out to other people? Absolutely, we would want to see more of that. So we have shared parking, rather than saying just because you own one individual lot, you have to provide $45,000 worth of parking infrastructure for tenants who might not be using it, for example. So that's kind of the goal that a lot of the other subcommittees have been considering. I will also note that the Institute for Transportation Engineers, the ITE, which kind of pushed and invented parking minimums across the United States in 2019, they began changing their tone and saying that cities should only start to reevaluate them if they actually think that they're going to work for the community. And we know from our parking studies that were done in 2017, the Winona County parking study that was done recently for the jail, that we actually have an oversupply of parking in the vast majority of our community. So finding those patterns that actually matter for those individual locations are going to be really important, because we've gone out, we've mapped thousands of data points now where we can click on one individual spot and tell you how much parking is available in the morning, in the midday, or in the evening, within 150 feet, 300 feet, 450 feet, and then say, great, you are now able to access that 450 feet, a block and a half, right? And so we're just not seeing the demand to a point where we need to have these minimums set by an individual number by Carlos and me, for example. But circulation management is something we should definitely be looking at. So things like, do we need parking meters for peak occupancy times, for example, or do we need parking permit periods for individual residential
No,
neighborhoods?
we don't
Yeah.
need any of that. When I moved here, I could always park in front of the library, and I always had like a baby and 2 toddlers, you know, and like, it was so convenient. And every time I came for story time there, I could come. Every other mom who came, they'd park right there along with me. And then it became so difficult to
Right.
park around there. That's so difficult. You could maybe park a block and a half away, but that's not so convenient when you have a baby and 2 toddlers, which
Right.
was always the case for me at that time.
Mm.
And so people say, well, these people from Minneapolis or St. Paul or whatever, they came and they said we have way too much parking. But the fact is, people who live in Minneapolis and St. Paul, they live in a big city and they trade some small town, like some of the things that make Winona wonderful for that. Like, they have better job opportunities. They have all kinds of like more cultural opportunities.
Sure.
They have all kinds of things that we don't have.
Mhm.
But we have all kinds of things they don't have, which is I can just park wherever I'm going, right in front of it. And so I think that, yeah, I think you have to be a little careful about what you're training.
Right. And we're not recommending a specific policy here so much as we're saying that we allowing substitution of bicycles and other multimodal. So it's about flexibility, not necessarily the individual policy itself. So those changes will go through a public hearing process. It'll go through anything before any adoption, if anything like that would occur. So even though we have this as a potentiality, it's not necessarily going to be removing it straight out the gate, for example. But anybody else want to add to that conversation?
Do you have circulation management on here somewhere?
It's touched on in a couple other sections, but
Okay.
not explicitly managed. So we can definitely add a parking goal.
And it's a delicate thing, and it's something that you have to continually assess, you know, how much parking do you need without requiring too much? And how much do you want to encourage landlords to provide so that there's something without, you know, requiring too much. So one thing that we did recently with bicycle parking is, you know, Luke worked on it, is allow bicycle substitution for up to 4 required parking spaces. And so what that does in a larger development, it gives additional flexibility, but there's a cap on it. You know, so the max is 4. So somebody wants to put a new apartment building in, they'll get some flexibility, but for the rest of the units, they either have to do 1 per unit or 2 parking spaces per unit.
Mhm.
So, yeah, being careful with how it's implemented, and I think that those types of concerns, Carrie, would come up through the public hearing process, through the planning commission taking a look at it, and at city council as well. So, definitely.
All right. Any other comments? Next goal? All right, Mitch, you're giving me a shrug. We'll move up to the next goal. All right, pursue priority road improvements. So these are actually projects that have kind of been lingering, or one of them is a project that's been lingering since the multimodal study was done in the 1990s. And that's considering and reassessing the Mankato Avenue north-south corridor for additional capacity and potentially along the Louisa Street extension. So we've touched on that briefly here. I don't know that we're at a point where we've had a recent multimodal study to justify a new Louisa Street extension. So that's why we have reassess listed here. And I know that engineering and Ryan are probably chomping at the bit to go do a reassessment of Mankato Avenue after all the roundabouts are in. But it definitely gives us an opportunity to pause and see if that traffic flow is working or not. Similarly, or the next objective, pursuing investments consistent with complete streets policy and reinvesting through municipal state aid road monies. So just being consistent, we've already called out a lot of the complete streets policy elements and the other goals. One goal that we discussed potentially not necessarily including here is revising truck routes through the city. So the first objective there would be assessing the current truck routes in the city and pursuing a truck routes management system and promote changes that will improve access to the community. So how do trucks get through? How are we measuring that? What are the outcomes that we're actually seeking as a community? I don't know that we have a document that actually changes or explains that. Secondly, enforcing vehicle noise laws on all routes and citywide to the extent feasible. This is a carryover from 2007. Sometimes I think you can never spell out enforcement enough. So let's go ahead and reiterate it. And then one thing we did touch on here was investing in working with GPS technology providers to provide truck routes that would prioritize Mankato Avenue and Pelzer Street. So ideally going through those areas rather than going directly through downtown. As Brian DeFrang, our public works director, mentioned a few meetings ago, that might not be an outcome that's possible, but we may as well try it and see if we can facilitate that. Anything else?
It's a novel idea. I like that as an idea. I have like no faith in that it working. But like, I don't
It's like
you're
a little
right.
thing.
That's kind of idea.
I do think it's like worth a shot. It's better than nothing. You know what I mean? Just trying to like convince someone to just like press a button in like somewhere on the coast to just tell the truck drivers to just, hey, please go this other way. Maybe.
It seems to me that must be a possible thing because
Yeah,
they design those roads that they recommend based on a variety of things.
Mhm.
What's best for the communities they're passing through could very well be one of those things. That
Yeah.
they consider if they know about it.
Yeah. No, that's why I'm like, yeah, dude, go for it. Yeah.
And actually, Carrie, you just made me think of something that I hadn't thought of before, and maybe it might be worth looking, but designing of streets and truck routes, and Ryan, maybe I'll tap your expertise here a little bit, because they're much larger vehicles and there's more wear and tear from actual trucks on a street. Is there any design elements for truck routes in particular in terms of road surfacing that would be ideal to call out, or is this something that we just kind of say, great, asphalt?
I don't know that well, I mean, the problem is some of our streets are literally just seal coat built up, not actual pavement. I mean, most of the streets that we would redo, we kind of have our set pavement structure. The biggest thing would be big enough curb radiuses for allowing the turning movements.
Sure.
That would kind of be the biggest thing.
Perfect. And do we have a separate, not necessarily curb radius standard, but truck route design standard for our streets that you're aware of?
For
Highway 43, for example, well, I mean, that's actually.
like for the radius.
Yeah, for the radius, and then, if we were to go and do a reconstruction, what does that roadbed look like for surfacing? Is there anything different necessarily or no?
We would have bigger curb radiuses like South Baker. We're making those smaller actually because it's not a truck route. And then it allows us to actually have less concrete, make things easier to build that way. So we'd have bigger curb radiuses. We would have to look on the truck route. We would have to kind of figure out amount of traffic, percentage of trucks to figure out what that pavement structure would be.
Okay.
So it kind of depends. You build on what's called ESOLs, which is single axle loads. So you'd have to kind of figure out the lifespan, what your ESOLs would be, and then you would determine your pavement structure from that.
Okay.
So
It's more on a case by case basis.
Yeah.
That's just what I added there. So that's good to know. Okay, great. Anything else to add about truck routes? Brian, we haven't heard from you in a while. I'm calling on you, putting the spotlight on you.
I like the idea of the truck routes to, if we're rebuilding a street that is a truck route, let's look at, are the turning radius is appropriate, or could be sometimes maybe widen them slightly to help them move smoother so they don't slow up the rest of us so much, like happens all the time at Maine and Sarnia. around poor Jerry Volkman's house.
I do think about that guy.
So, along the route, one is, once you identify what that is, you need to make sure, I mean, some are passing through, but there's a lot of them that are servicing the businesses within and all, so we gotta make sure that they still have. And that the access then that they would have to take at that point is still desirable, right, if we change the main route to town. And then the other thing would be to locate services on those main routes for them, because they need gas stations, they need. And food stops, I mean, that's part of their, as they're coming through, they're looking for those, kind of services, so if you don't have them on that main route. They're gonna veer off of that to get where they need to go to have them. So,
All right, so I'm saying local appropriate services and land use concentrations to serve truckers and freight operators. Hitting what you're saying? Perfect. All right, any other elements? All right, we'll jump up to support and enhance passenger rail service. So this would be pursuing improvements to the Amtrak station and support investments in the surrounding area. Rezoning the area surrounding the Amtrak station to support mixed uses and higher density housing and commercial use. That's coming from our housing subcommittee and our land use subcommittee and our heritage preservation subcommittee as well. Provide improved wayfinding and informational signage at the Amtrak station to act as a welcoming gateway for the city. This is also something that's really kind of been discussed, is how do people who arrive at our community feel welcome? Our economic development subcommittee really wants to emphasize that. Provide multimodal access to the location around the Amtrak station. So bicycle and scooter share programs, rideshare apps, transit service, rental car services. When somebody gets here, how do they keep going through our community? And then advocating for the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago second train and support rail investment efforts for that project. We know that that is a project that will probably be coming. We anticipate it coming. We're all excited about it. We just need to continue to support it. And then supporting historic rehabilitation of the Amtrak station and providing additional interpretive signage. How has that station served our community in the past? How can it be improved? How can we make sure that it continues to speak to our heritage? And supporting the regional rail network planning in the surrounding region. So there's probably been about 3 kind of larger rail network planning efforts lately, and the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago train is kind of the latest version. But if we go back 30 years ago, we were talking about a 9-state region trail network that was kind of centered on Chicago that we could actually be a part of. So if something like that comes up, we want to be supportive of that. Any issues or comments or concerns? Perfect. Oh.
There used to be a person working on the station. Is it likely that there will be one again if we get a second trainer?
I haven't heard that we're going to get another person. My understanding there's a whole bunch. Yeah, I know. We lost ours, and then COVID has kind of led to losing even more across the country. Even some places, like I was just talking to some planners in New York, upstate New York, places that are served with regular 30-minute trains to New York City, they're no longer being staffed by people. It seems like the trend is just going that way. So I don't know that we necessarily, I'll happily add it though.
But I see, I went in there because I couldn't believe they're open 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. They were. Yes. And then you can buy a ticket right there. I mean, it wasn't that bad. There's a bathroom you can go in. I mean, I'm surprised we don't have more referrals to that place where people can just be. I feel like there's so many people that need a place to be. But I mean, it seemed like there could be, I didn't see anything historical talking about what happened, how it was servicing the community in the past. That would be cool.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, connections to the transit or anything like that. So that's great to have that.
When you went there, were there people leaving?
Just me.
Nobody got the train for a smoke break or anything either?
No.
Gosh.
Like, I thought at one time too, when they were looking to take that, or when the talk was to take that person out of there, that they were looking at actually volunteer opportunities for people to, again, staff, that if there was, especially during the times when the train, would actually be coming in. So it wouldn't have to be around the clock or throughout the whole day, but if you could rely on when the train would actually show up to have somebody staffing it.
Yeah. So if Amtrak wanted a volunteer department, basically.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think it was actually locals. It wasn't necessarily Amtrak that was driving it. There were some locals here that were again trying to
Okay.
push the second train thing. And they were saying, how can we promote it more? And the idea of if you're really interested in supporting it, could you get somebody or people that would be willing to staff, or to, staff it during those times on a volunteer basis? Or maybe pie in the sky, I don't know, but.
It's such a shame though, because the more you take out, the human elements, the more, it's just, if you have a smartphone and you know how to use it, if you have if you have a credit card, if if you're just if you're a person with limitations or complications in your life, like, it's just so very nice to have a person who can hold your hand and to help you through, like, this process of getting on a train if you're not used to getting on a train. I think like if you want to promote this kind of, if you want to promote rail usage, and I think it's such a good way for people to get around, but if you don't know how to do it, and it's like a scary automaton that they're gonna that's gonna tell you how to do it, and you're not likely to.
I think based on this conversation, I'm adding a line here, pursuing staffing, volunteer, or paid support at the Amtrak station. And, I re-raise as an additional question, you could have a Visit Winona, type staffing situation there where people are welcome to our community. We could end up with a commercial storefront there that's like, hey, welcome to Winona, we're here to help you figure out whatever. Not that I'm putting pressure on Visit Winona to have another person, obviously, but something similar. There's definitely an opportunity for that. It's a great idea.
Yeah, I like the idea. Sorry, maybe you want to move on, but like the Amtrak station is a really good example of it, like making like little regional or like Winona regional like kiosks, like a little tiny travel spot where it has like a lot of information about things to do in like around town and stuff. So like have that at the Amtrak station, have that at Levy Park, have that at Bluffside Park. You know what I mean? Have that at Lake Park, like places that don't really have any indication of it. You know what I mean? Like Bluffside Park is a really good example. Like there's a map and stuff, like at the beginning of it, but like you're just kind of like, where do I go? You know what I mean? What am I doing here? And like, is it connected to anything else? Yeah. So, but the idea of the person is what we're talking about, and that's a good idea too.
All right, we have a signage component. I added the word kiosk because I think you've either been, connecting with other people in subcommittees, because the word kiosk has been thrown around like 10 times.
Oh, really?
last week, I feel. It was like kiosk, we need a kiosk. You seen that kiosk? And I'm like, oh, yes, a kiosk. Guess that'll be going into the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect.
I think it'd be cool to just like super invest in the Amtrak station and make it really cool and like a spot, and then like a place where people can like get out of the open air for a little bit. You know what I mean? I mean, like it could do a lot of things. It could be like a multi-purpose spot. Yeah.
And it's clean and air conditioned right now. I mean, it's nice inside.
Oh, but I had a homeless friend who used to be there and the.
Oh, they would love to. They would stop by.
I don't know if they're still monitoring.
Oh, okay.
I think, Luke, if again, you were pursuing some of the others like the rental cars, right? I mean, could that location actually be their, desk, or if you will, where they're staffing and stuff, once you're there as a part of.
Right.
the place.
Transport hub,
Right.
rental bikes,
Yeah.
rental cars.
They're sharing that staffing person, across.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's actually, yeah, that's a good point.
This is sparking a lot of creative ideas. I like this a lot. But we're gonna move on. All right.
I'm guessing with that depot, Amtrak probably doesn't own that station. It's probably owned by the Canadian Pacific,
That's a good question. I'll have to double check for that, Brian.
Well, they did do some remodeling in there, like restrooms a few years ago.
And they got a hold of me about potentially doing some exterior changes as well. So we'll probably see something like that in the near future too.
CP did that, Brian?
I think, I don't know. I just remember seeing outside temporary restrooms for a while. Seemed like it took them quite a long time to do that.
Okay.
All right, we'll jump up here to goal, rail crossing improvements, objective, improve grade crossings where needed to improve vehicular and multimodal transportation across rail lines. It's a pretty straightforward one, but I think it speaks to Gary's egg test.
Yeah, objective 2.
There you go. Yeah,
But, and I think in even some of those, I mean, I know that you can possibly, your wheel, I mean, get in sideways and can, grab the wheel and throw you off the bike and stuff.
Yeah.
But Sue is brand new. I mean, they just finished that.
They did, yeah.
So that's one thing I always did when I was with the kids. I said, go across it in a perpendicular fashion. I'm kidding with
Right.
Yeah, the problem is with the rail crossing, there's really not a good way to make it bike friendly or any kind of wheel friendly other than a vehicle, because you have to have that opening for the train wheel, so there's really not a good solution to it is the problem.
To that perpendicular, but there's better ones. I can't think of which ones. Sue is just almost the worst.
Okay,
Main Street's a lot better.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's some that you can hardly feel it.
okay.
And Sue's bad, and that was called out by one of our council members, I think, before your time when they redid Sue's
Yeah,
Street.
that was got replaced 2 years ago.
Yeah, and he was like, this is still terrible. We need to work on that, but ultimately. it's rail right away.
Those things don't last very long either. Seems like that's every 3 or 5 years to replace those.
Right, yeah, and I will note, in the 2007 plan, we called out specific crossings. I think it maybe has more weight to just say all of them. Because some of them aren't necessarily going to change, some are gonna have opportunities for change over time, some are a little bit easier. Talking about calling out specific rail things, Wall Street was called out in the last plan. I think it's worth calling out again, because nothing's really changed. Advocating for the replacement and removal of the Wall Street track as currently used to access riverfront industries, but crosses 7 streets and 30 driveways. It's about 2,600 linear feet. And then additionally, removal of the Wall Street spur would eliminate most, but not all switching conflicts on Mankato Avenue. So that came from our intermodal study in the late 1990s. I think it's been improved a little bit since then, but I don't think that there's anything scheduled in terms of making that considerably better.
They replaced all that track in the last 5 years, rebuilt that.
Yep.
And if we take Wall Street away, that's gonna put all the Wall Street traffic down to Levy Park.
Are you saying that we should just remove this goal, Brian?
Well, I don't know. It's either the community decide to live with Wall Street or put more rail traffic downtown. Because you're not gonna get rid of Bay State, and I don't know who else, other customers, primarily it's Bay State in there, right? And there is some customers there on the east end, but the rail's gotta get in and out of there some way. Or it makes a loop from Wall Street down to Front Street and goes out through the west end. So if you take away Wall Street, the traffic's gonna go somewhere else. If you take it away from Wall Street, then it goes down through Levy Park,
Yeah,
which we talked about trying to get rid of that somewhere else as well.
that's right. All of the rail, Brian.
Yeah. I shouldn't maybe say this, but take Wall Street where it, at the southern end, that track turns to the west and then crosses, this joins up with the main line, your Mankato Avenue. What if that swung east? So that traffic, the switching traffic could go across Louisa Street and out to the east, the one stop up Mankato Avenue as much.
All right, I'm highlighting this. I think that I'll go back and double check some of our past plans, and I think maybe the language change will be assess Wall Street traffic corridor. Might be the way that we're gonna go for that.
Mhm.
Does that sound satisfactory to you, Brian?
Sure, but it is inconvenient. Sometimes it seems like they get there and they stop up the whole east end. They'll stop for a few minutes for some reason, and you can't get out of the east end without going like around Louisa Street or something.
I lived on the other side of Wall Street for like a year when I first got married. And yeah, that totally happens. Like it happened to me multiple times where it would just be stuck across the whole everything. And I would literally have to go all the way to Louisa Street, go around and like Menards and stuff. Cause it'd be there for like a half hour.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. The joys of being an industrial town surrounded by rail, which is not necessarily a bad thing. All right, we'll jump up to the next one, which is related, Brian, pursuing track and storage yard relocations. So the first objective here is levy park rail yard relocation for the use of recreational space and developable land along the levy park area and promote integration with downtown. I know this is a long ongoing practice that's been many, many, many years and it continues to be going on. In addition, we're seeing some development that's putting pressure on some of those side rail lines as well along Levy Park. Advocating for the Amtrak station and Canadian Pacific rail yard improvements to limit switching movements that impact street crossings and treat the Amtrak station as a welcoming entrance to the city. This is somewhat similar to what we were just talking about. And then seeking private partnerships for improvements to the surrounding area. And that surrounding area is Amtrak, the Amtrak station. For reinvestment to meet housing and commercial demands. So basically reiterating some of what you were just saying, Brian, obviously, not everything's going to go away in Levy Park because some of that is a federal mandate. So it's really about cleaning it up more than anything else.
Yeah.
Any issues with this goal, concerns, comments?
Is the only suggestion, Lucas, is, or maybe we've done in the past, is there ways to collect data on the disruptions, the times that, like I said, where people are held up for 30 minutes? How many times, a year does that happen? And because the railroads will respond to data versus anecdotal, kind of stuff, right? So if you can log that and then can continue to feed that to them, they know that you're watching, right, their operations, which puts, a little more pressure on them to do stuff. And again, there's federal funds available for doing stuff right now that makes sense, especially for cities like ours that are entrenched in rail. So.
Do we know how to, are we able to operate those types of studies, or is that something that we've relied on other people?
There is some, I don't know if it's a federal or a railroad or what it is. There is a site where you can log, say Mankato, if you're stuck for a half hour, you can go in and log that. I don't know. I'd have to look at where it is again. I've been looking into that grant that you had passed along.
Okay.
And within that, there is somewhere that you can go in, say, hey, I'm stuck here. It was for so long, and whether people are putting that in for Mankato or not, probably not, because they don't know about it.
Right.
But there is that
I
option.
work at the road and I don't know about it.
Yeah.
You need like a text trigger as soon as you're stopped there. It's like,
Wow.
do you want to fill out the survey? Will you wait for 15
But
minutes?
it's fine out in front of it, right? But it's hanging here,
Yeah.
we're waiting here.
Angry, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then you put the URL. You mean,
Do we get problems with rail crossing? I live near Broadway and Baker, and sometimes it's in a town, they don't often stop, but they'll go really slow. Seems like it happens more on weekends,
Right.
where they kind of fast walking pace through part of town.
Yeah.
Tie things up first.
All right, folks, I want to be mindful of the fact that we are 5 minutes away from a whole hour. I know that this is very fun, and we actually have another comprehensive plan meeting at 5 o'clock here. I want to take a look at our next meeting date here. If we can look about 2 weeks out down to the 25th, does 4 p.m. on the 25th continue to work for people?
I would not be able to make that one. I'm gonna be out of town.
You're gonna be out of town the whole week, or?
I'm gonna be out of town starting on the 25th.
Okay,
So I can do,
does 4 p.m. on the 24th work for people?
no.
Yeah.
I know I'm
What
busy
works for you,
Thursday,
Mitch?
Tuesday. That Tuesday works.
All right,
No.
Brian?
Oh, maybe the week before or the Thursday after?
I mean, we could do the week before if you guys are fine doing a 1 week variation. I think that we're pretty close to creating this document.
Or maybe Thursday, the 1st of September?
Yes,
Let's do the 18th.
the 18th, 4 o'clock.
I am unavailable, but that shouldn't.
Carrie, are you available on the 1st?
I am available on the 1st.
Okay.
So first. All right, we will plan on September 1st. I do want this to kind of be our opportunity to wrap up the goals and objectives for this and so the steering committee. So we'll plan on that, and I will update this document and send that out to everybody so that we all have a more consistent document to look at. And I want to kind of get the seal of approval of the subcommittee on the 1st. Perfect. Thank you all very much for your time. Thanks for being here. Thank you for your ideas. You all are wonderful individuals, and we couldn't do this whole process without you. We will see you on the 1st. Thanks.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.